Good evening, everyone. Tonight's shiur, as always, Lilu Nishmat Avi Mori Dov Berber and Uven Halevi Imi Moroti Rachel Bat Harav Michael. And this Shabbos we have the privilege of reading the longest parsha in the Torah, parshat Naso. And one of the things that makes it so long, as we all I think know, is the fact that we have the Chanukat HaMizbeach, where we have the story of the inauguration of the Mishkan, which includes basically the same exact parsha, same exact psukim, 12 times, once for each of the Nesiim. And we're going to talk a little bit about the chapter that talks about the Chanukat HaMizbeach. So without any further ado, let's go to Parshat Naso. This is Perek Zayin, the last three aliyot in the parsha. I'm going to go through them very briefly, and then we'll see what the parshanim, what kind of light they have to shed on this whole subject and why it seems so lengthy. Okay, Vayibiyom Kalot Moshe Lakim et Hamishkan. The parak starts with on the day that Moshe concluded or finished to establish the Mishkan. Vayimshach Oto, he anointed it. Vayikadesh Oto, he sanctified it. V'et Kol Kelav, together with all of the utensils that were included therein. V'et HaMizbeach v'et Kol Kelav, and separately listed are the Mizbeach and all of its items. Vayimshachem, and he anointed them, and Vayikadesh Otam, and he sanctified them. Vayakrivu Nesiei Yisrael, and the Nesiim, the princes of Yisrael, came close. Rashi Beit Avotam, the heads of each family. Haim Nesiei Hamatot, these are the Nesiim of each of the tribes. Haim Omdim al Hapakudim, they are the ones who are going to stand by Moshe when he does the counting. Vayaviu et karbanom lifnei Hashem, they brought their offering before Hashem. What did they bring? They brought sheish eglot tzav, 6-something wagons. Tzav it's a very interesting. We're going to have a whole bunch of different interpretation as to why the word tzav is here, but these are wagons, some type of wagons. Ushnei asar bakar, and there were 6 wagons, and there were 12 cattle, oxen to pull these 6 wagons. Agalal shnei nesiim mishor liachad. Each pair of Nesiim brought 1 wagon, but each Nasi brought one ox. And they brought them close before the Mishkan. And Hashem says to Moshe, Kach meitam, you may take them take this gift from them. And the wagons and oxen should be to do the work of the tabernacle, the Ol Moed, and you should apportion them to the Leviim, each person according to the workload that he has. Moshe takes the wagons and the cattle that belong with them, he gives them to the Leviim. 2 of the wagons, and 4 of the cattle, Natali Vnei Gershon, are given to the Gershon family, according to their work. Now, if we go back to the beginning of the parsha and last week's parsha, we know that the 3 Levitical families have different roles in carrying and transporting the Mishkan from place to place whenever the Jews are moving. The Gershonites are primarily responsible for the curtains and the roof, all of which are fabric or leather. So they needed 2 wagons. And 4 of the wagons and the remaining 8 cattle are given to the Merari family, according to their work, which was Biadi Tamar ben Aaron HaKohen, which was superintended by Itamar, the son of Aaron the Kohen. Now, the Merari...
Excuse me.
Yes. Yes?
Are you going to comment on the fact that the Nesiim were just appointed now in the 2nd month, and this
yes, Alan, we're going to get to that question, Bezrat Hashem, about the timing of this chapter versus the timing of the count. Yes. Okay? Thank you for the question. No, it's a good question, because that's one of the questions that Parshanim asked is, this chapter is B'yom Kalot Moshe Lakim et HaMishkan, which happens on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and the chapter in the the beginning of the book, chapter 1 of Parshat Bamidbar, happens on the second month, a month after these events are happening. So yes, that's a very good question. How did we know who was going to be appointed to be the overseers of the count with Moshe? So yeah, okay. Okay, so again, the Gershon family carries primarily the curtains and the roofs. The Kahat family, I'm sorry, the Merari family, which gets 4 of the wagons, is carrying the beams, the heavy wood beams that make up the Mishkan, as well as all the poles that the curtains are hung on, as well as the Adanim, the heavy sockets, each of which 100 of those for over the 50 poles. So they are carrying the heavy stuff. That's why they get 4 of the wagons. To the sons of Kahat, he did not give any wagons. Their apportionment was 0. So they were to carry the holy vessels, the aron, the shulchan, the mizbeach, and they had to carry it on their shoulders, not on a wagon. And then the Nesiim brought close their offerings for the inauguration of the Mizbeach on the day it was anointed. And the Nesiim all brought their offerings before the altar. In addition, and then we're going to see what those were as we go through the parsha. Hashem says to Moshe, Nasiach od layom, one prince for each day. Nasiach od layom, one prince for each day. Yakrivu et karbanam, they should offer their offerings. Chanukah mizbeach. The Parshanim are going to tell us very briefly. I'm going to give a little bit of an advance here that all 12 of the Nesiim all descended upon the Mishkan on day 1 with their entire offerings that they wanted to bring, and these wagons and cattle. And Moshe did not know whether he was allowed to accept them, and B, if he was allowed to accept them. Hold on 1 minute. Give me 1 minute. Hold on. Certain as to whether he is to accept these gifts or not, and if he is to accept them, what he is to do with them. That's why we have twice. We had in verse, back in verse, hey, Hashem says, yes, you may take it. We're in chapter 7 of Bamidbar. When Hashem says to Moshe, he says, yes, you may take these wagons from the Nesiim, and here later on, he says to Moshe that each one is in first Yud Aleph. He says to Moshe that instead of all 12 bringing their offerings on one day, I want each one to have their own day. For the first 12 days, they are going to bring offerings to inaugurate the Mizbeach, Chanukah HaMizbeach. And then it tells us, the one who brought it on the first day is Nachshon ben Aminadav, Mate Yehuda, from the tribe of Yehuda. And the next 4 psukim, basically describe what it was he brought. He brought 1 silver plate, weighs 130 shekels, 1 silver bowl, a plate. These were each filled with flour for a mincha. He brings a spoon filled with ketoret, and then he brings a bunch of animals, a par and an ayil and a kevis for an olah, a sirizim for a chatat, and for zevach shlamim he brings 2 ox, 5 rams, 5 older sheep, 5 younger sheep, and that was his karban. The next, let's see, it's 6 psukim times 11. The next 66 psukim are each of the Nesiim bringing the same exact karban. Okay, it says, and what is his karban? The same exact karban. And you notice I've skipped it, and then it says Netanel ben Tuar. 3rd day, 4th day, 5th day. Each day, one of the Nesiim brings the same exact korban. That's why this parak is so long, because we have 6 psukim for each Nasi, total of 70 plus psukim for the whole parsha. Okay, Zod Chanukah HaMizbeach. We're now up to verse 84 in chapter 7, which summarizes the whole first 12 days. What's happened? This is the inauguration of this Bech Biyomi Mashachoto on the day it was consecrated, Mayet Nesiei Israel, from each of the leaders of the tribes of Israel. And then it lists what they brought together. Each one brought one cow, one bowl. So together they brought 12 bowls and 12 plates, and filled with whatever fine flour for a meal offering. Then they had 12 spoons, which were filled with incense to bring as an incense offering. And they brought all these cattle. So again, it includes with, after it tells us all of these things, it then tells us finally our parsha ends with the pasuk Uvevo Moshe Elohim Moed. When Moshe would come to Ohel Moed, so Hashem would speak to him. By Yishmayet Hakol, he would hear the Hashem's voice emanating. Me'al Hakapo, Midaber love, speaking to him. Me'al Hakaporet, Asher al Aron, we do it from the Kaporet, which was covering the Aron. Bibein Shnei Kruvim, from between the Shnei Kruvim, Vayidaber love, and the voice would speak to him. And that's the end of our parsha. So some of the questions Alan already raised one question, is how do we know who these Nesiim were? The other question that Moshe has is, what order do they go in? Do they go in birth order, or do they go in some other order? Once we said that each of the 12 have to go on a different day, how do we decide what order they go in? We're going to talk, hopefully we're going to get through some of the parsha and even discuss some of these aspects of this parsha. Okay. Firstly, Rashi has a very interesting comment. It says, "Vahi biyom kalot Moshe," not biyom kalot Moshe. Kalat Ketiv. It's written as though it said, it could be the word read as the word kala. But number that it was a kala. That Moshe was like a kala, or Am Yisrael Yom HaKamat HaMishkan Hoyu Yisrael Kekala Hanichneset Lechupa. That on the day the Mishkan is finally erected and left standing, and that the Am Yisrael is ready now to Hashem is ready to rest his Shekhinah on the Mishkan. Bnei Yisrael are like a kala entering into the chuppah with Hashem. They're entering into Kiviyachol, a wedding with Hashem, that we are his, Hashem and Am Yisrael are joined together, Kiviyachol, like a chassan and kala. And that's why it uses the word kalot Moshe rather than nigmar Moshe or some other term which would mean completion. That's what Rashi quotes from the Midrash. Okay, now it says Kalot Moshe, that Moshe is the one who is given credit for Lakimet HaMishkan, for establishing the Mishkan. And Rashi again quotes then, Moshe, we don't find Moshe involved in the work of fashioning the material into the Mishkan. He's not involved. However, Tala'o HaKatuv b'Moshe, nonetheless, the pasuk says that Moshe is the one who was responsible for the Mishkan. And it seems strange if Bezalel and Aholiab and all of the artisans who were working with him are the ones who actually did the work and made everything. Why is Moshe given credit for it? Lefisha Masar Nafsho Allah, because Moshe gave his whole essence for it. Lirot Tavnit Kol Davar V'Davar, to ensure, in other words, Moshe, even though Bezalel was the overseer from a construction perspective, Moshe was the overseer in terms of transmitting to the artisans what each item was supposed to look like, how it was supposed to go together and everything. Moshe Harahu Bahar, as he was shown on the mountain, in order to teach those who were doing the actual work. And the reason that he gets his name associated with Mishkan is the Lotav etavnit echad. He made no mistakes in any of the shapes. He was able to properly transmit the actual designs to the artisans. And presumably this was not done with blueprints and 3D images and whatever. It was done verbally, which made it very challenging, perhaps, to make sure that the artisans understood exactly what Moshe was saying, and Moshe was saying exactly what Hashem had told him and what he had seen on Har Sinai for constructing the Mishkan. Interestingly enough, we find we find something similar with David HaMelech when it comes to the building of the Beit HaMikdash. Even though David is not involved at all in the building of the Beit HaMikdash, it's his son Shlomo who does it. But Lefisha Masar Nafsho, being in Beit HaMikdash, because he did all he could to prepare Shlomo to be able to build the Beit HaMikdash. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Dilm Sochar Hashem David et Kol Anuto Asher Nishpal Hashem. Hashem remembered to David all the effort that he had put in to try establish the Beit Hamikdash. Lefikach nikra al shemo, and we see that ultimately the Beit Hamikdash is called by the name of David. Shenamar re'ei beitcha David, see your house, David. Okay, so that's what, again, David HaMelech, just like Moshe, is so involved in the building of the Mishkan that it's called by the Mishkan. It says that Yom Kalot Moshe Lakim et HaMishkan. So too David HaMelech gets the Beit Hamikdash mentioned in the building of the Beit Hamikdash, even though he's not physically involved in the actual building. Okay, B'Yom Kalot Moshe Lakim. Now, the day Moshe finished to establish. V'lo nemar b'Yom Hakim. It doesn't say on the day that he established it. It's on the day that he finished putting it up. Melamed, this comes to teach us. Shekol Shivat Yemei HaMiluim Haya Moshe Mamido Umefarko. That Moshe every day during the 7 days that the Kohanim were going through their training, the Shivat Yemei HaMiluim, where they were learning how to do the be Kohanim, every morning Moshe would put up the Mishkan, and every evening he would take it down, single-handedly, presumably. At least that's the impression that the Midrash wants to give, because it's Moshe as the one who's doing it. Uba'oto hayom, however, on that day, the day of the first day of Nisan, where now the Mishkan is ready to start functioning, Hamido v'lo parko, he again put it up, and he didn't, but this time he did not take it apart and put it back into storage. L'kach nemar, and that's why the pasuk says B'yom Kalot Moshe Lakim, on the day that Moshe finished putting it up. Oto hayom kolo hakomotov. That day was the last day that Moshe is the one who had to put it up or take it down. That Moshe was involved. Once this is done, after this day, Rosh Chodesh Nisan Hayu, after this day, which was Rosh Chodesh Nisan of the year 2449, the year after they left Mitzrayim, the second year after they, one year minus 2 weeks since they've left Mitzrayim, that is the day that the Levium now are taking over the job of being the ones who will be in charge of transport, of deconstructing and transporting them and the Mishkan and then reconstructing it. Okay, so Rashi again goes a little bit further. The next day after that was the day that Moshe burned the para aduma, and so that everybody would have their ashes so they could become tahor. Bishlishi hizu hazaya rishona bishvi gilchu. So again, these were all part of Am Yisrael going through preparation for being able to access the Mishkan once it is assembled and once it is functioning. Okay, Haim Nisiyeh Hamato. Now, Alan asked the question, and Rashi's going to try to answer it. We talked about the fact that these are the leaders of the tribes, and then the pasuk says, Haim Omdim Al Hapakudim. They're the ones who are going to be standing by Moshe when he does the counting. Now, to us who've read about that last Shabbos, this doesn't seem out of place. Okay, we know who the Nesiim are. Beginning of Bamidbar, we said Hashem tells Moshe that when you do this count, you're to assign 12 people, one from each tribe. It lists their names, and so we know who they were. But given that this parsha of the Mishkan, of the establishment of Mishkan, is a month earlier, how did Am Yisrael know who the Nesiim were? They hadn't yet been appointed to be involved in the count. So Rashi says very simply that it's interesting. He says, who are these Nesiim? They were the overseers, the tribal overseers in Egypt, and they were the ones who the Egyptians would punish when the Jews didn't make their proper quota of bricks. As it says, Vayuku Shotre B'nai Yisrael, the heads, the overseers of B'nai Yisrael, were the ones who were responsible for each tribal quota, were these 12 individuals, and they were the ones who suffered the brunt of the wrath of the Egyptians when there was a shortage of bricks for that day. So that's why they merited this position. Haim Omdim al Hapakudim, they are the ones who, now it's interesting, it doesn't say Haim She'amdu al Hapakudim, those are the ones that stood by Moshe when they were doing the counting. These are the ones that are standing by Moshe when he does the counting. She'amdu im Moshe v'Aaron kishemanu et Yisrael, she'nemar v'itchem yiyu ish ish lamateh. As we read last Shabbos, that each tribe had one person who was with Moshe and Aaron when they did the counting. Okay. Now we get to these wagons. Shesh eglos tzav. 6 wagons that are called tzav. Rashi's interpretation of tzav is ein tzav ela mechupim. Tzav simply means they were covered wagons, that they had They were, I don't know. It's very hard when you've grown up in America and you're used to these Wild West, Oregon Trail, and you have these nice Conestoga wagons, they call them, which basically was a flatbed, a bunch of wheels, and a tent over it that would puff out. But I don't think that's what they looked like. I think they were standard. It was a flatbed with four poles at the four corners and some type of cover across it. Okay, and then Rashi says tzabim u'paradim agalot mechusot kiruyim tzabim. Rashi simply says eglot tzav means that they were covered wagons of some type of nature. By the way, we're going to see different interpretations as we go forward in this. What does eglot tzav mean? I hope we'll get to some more interpretations of that. They brought them before the Mishkan. As I said, Moshe was not willing to accept these wagons until HaKadosh Baruch Hu specifically said, okay, you can accept them. Medrash, Rashi quotes Midrash here. Amar Rabbi Natan. Rabbi Natan says the following, Ma ro hanesiim litnadev kan bitchila, u'b'melechet hamishkan lo itnadvu tchila. What motivated the Nesiim here to be first in line to bring Karbanot once the Mishkan is built, when they were collecting the donations for the Mishkan in Parshat Vayakel, it says everybody came, and then finally at the end, the Nesiim brought some of the precious stones. But the Nesiim were not first. They kind of waited till the end. It's like they're almost at the last of the givers are the Nesiim. Elakach amru hanesiim, but the reason is because the Nesiim themselves made a mistake, made poor judgment. They said, when it came to giving the donation, they said, let's see how much they collect, and we'll split the difference, whatever is missing. And here we have it's a fundraising campaign. We want to raise $1 million, okay? And they say, well, let's see. If we make it to $500,000, we'll split the other $500,000 among us. Whatever is left. But what happened? When they saw that not only did they reach the goal, but Moshe told them to stop bringing. Moshe told them to stop bringing. What are we going to do? Well, in the end, they did. They found something that they could bring. And all they had left to bring was the stones for the ephod and the choshen. So they really felt that they had missed out when it came to giving for the Mishkan because they wanted to be generous, but they didn't realize how generous Am Yisrael was going to be. So they figured this time, here they said, we're not going to make the same mistake twice. We're going to get right up in front, and we're going to bring first. Again, and it's a very important concept, because all too often we when it comes to doing something for the community, we might say, well, let's see what everybody else is doing before we say no. So here, what the parshat want to try and teach us is they have to get up and do it. Don't wait. Don't be waiting for others to give. Always give when you can. Okay, again, Moshe apportions the wagons according to the workload of each of the three Levitical families. And Rashi very simply explains, Shayamasa b'nei Gershon kal mishal Merari. The reason Gershon only gets 2 wagons is because their load was lighter than Merari's load, who had to get 4 wagons. Because who was Merari carrying? They had all the heavy stuff, the bases, the sockets for the poles, and the poles themselves, and all the wood pieces that held the curtains up, which was the heaviest part. Curtains are a lot lighter than the posts that hold them up in this case. Now, the Kahat family gets nothing. Ki avodat hakodesh alehem. Masa Devar HaKedusha, they carried all of the holy things, the Aron, the Shulchan, and the Mizbachot, the Fikach Bakatev, so they had to carry it on their shoulders. Now, interestingly enough, by the way, just so you should know, all of this work, if you start and figure out the weight of all of these items, it's virtually impossible for this to have been done in a totally human way. And certainly for Moshe to construct the Mishkan on a day-by-day basis straight. Really, in reality, in the Medrash, there's a Medrash that says basically the Mishkan carried itself, transported itself, put itself together, but Hashem wanted the miracle to be as minimized as possible, so he wanted to have people associated with doing each of these jobs so it would look as natural as possible and hide the miraculous nature of it as much as possible. But clearly, it was if you figure out that the krashim alone, okay, the krashim were 5 meters tall, solid wood beams. They were not light. As a matter of fact, remember I was studying this with my son. He said, each of these beams weighed something like a thousand kilo. No, 1,000 kilos or something like that. There was, they were rather heavy, 1,000 metric tons, whatever. So they were rather heavy items. And as such, we need to realize that a lot of the stuff, while we may look in the psukim and think it was natural, it wasn't. Okay. After they donated the wagons and the cattle to pull the wagons for the carrying and transporting Mishkan, in addition, because again they had missed out earlier, they also wanted to bring offerings to inaugurate the Mishkan. And again, they brought them all and they were waiting to find out what's the story. Again, Moshe is not willing to accept these offerings until he is told by Hashem, yes, you may accept them. Now we might ask, why does Hashem have to tell him that he has to accept them? Anybody can bring a korban. Why does Hashem have to specifically tell him that he can accept them? So it seems, I hope we'll get to it, but I don't know if we'll get to it inside. So I'll just briefly give you the fact that the offerings included ketoret and included a chatat. A chatat can only be brought for a specific sin in general, a personal offering of a chatat. And we know there's no such thing as a personal donation of ketoret. Ketoret is only given by the community, never given by an individual. So Hashem had to specifically tell Moshe, yes, you can accept these one time only for this one specific inauguration of the Mishkan. You're allowed to accept an individual offering of ketoret as well as a chatat, even though there's no specific sin that it's associated with. Because ordinarily, an individual cannot bring a chatat unless he has a specific sin. Whereas a communal chatat is different, but each of these were being brought by these 12 individuals, not as the congregation. That's the point. Okay. Yakrivut karbanon, they should bring their offerings. Even though Hashem tells them that it's okay to bring that, to accept these karbanot, Moshe still didn't know, well, do I accept them all at once, or do I accept them 3 a day, 2 a day? How do we do this? And furthermore, Im Kiseda told Otam, what order do they go? Who goes first? Do they go Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda? Or is there some other order that they need? Im Kiseder Hamasot, or are they going to bring them in the same order that when they travel, they're going to be traveling? So Hashem told them, not only are they going to bring in order, not all at once, but each one is to bring on his own day. He's not only to bring 2 a day or 3 a day to get it done. Each one gets their own day, but they come in the order that they would travel. And so therefore, that's why Yehuda, Yisachar, and Zvulun come on the first 3 days, because they are the camp. As we read last week, they are the camp that traveled first. And that's why, interestingly enough, as I said, there's this juxtaposition of which happened first. Obviously, our parsha happens first chronologically, and that is how the Am Yisrael already had an inkling of how they were going to be traveling ultimately. Okay. Now Rashi says the B'yom HaRishon, the first day is Nachshon ben Aminadav is bringing his offering, and this is the same day that Rashi quotes the Midrash. This morning in Megillah says, "Oto Hayom Natal Eser Torot." This day was HaRishon, the first. It was first for 10 different things. Rishon L'Maseh Bereshit, it happened to be the first day of the week. It was a Sunday. Rishon L'Nesim, it was the first day for the Nesim bringing their offerings. It was a Rosh Chodesh. And the Gemara there lists a bunch of other things. It's the first day that the Kohanim said the Birchat Kohanim. It's the first day that offerings are brought. And unfortunately, if we go back to parshat Shmini, it's also there that Nadav and Avihu bring the strange fire and die. So another thing that happens on this same day that Nachshon ben Aminadav is bringing his korban. Okay, he is Lamate Yehuda from the tribe of Yehuda. Yichsa Akatuv al Shifto, v'lo shegava mishafto v'hikriv. When it says Lamate Yehuda, it's only giving us his genealogy. It's not to tell us that he collected the money from the tribe to bring this offering. This was a personal offering, and that's the case with all 12 of these. They were personal offerings brought by the head of the tribe, not from communal funds that were collected amongst the tribe. Okay, and how do we know that? Rashi says, well, maybe it means that he collected all the money from the tribe of Yehuda. Talmud Lomar, where do I prove? How do I prove that it's not the case? Zet korban nachshon. This is the korban of nachshon, mishalo hevi, that he brought it from his own funds. He is the giver, and we have the same language, Zet korban, by each one of the 12 tribes at the end. After it lists the whole korban, it says that korban, whatever the person's name is, to tell us that each of these 12 were individual offerings, not communal offerings brought by the whole tribe or from the funds of the whole tribe. Each of these were given by these 12 individuals. Obviously, they had a few extra financial resources. Okay. So let the bowl and the plate were both filled with fine flour, the minchat dava, as a voluntary mincha offering. Asara zahav, the spoon was 10 shkalim, it was gold and it weighed 10 shkalim. Ketarguma, according to a targum, nishkal eser shikle kodesh hayaba. It weighed 10 shekels of this regular sanctuary shekel, not to be confused with the regular shekel, which was half the weight of a sanctuary shekel. So this was 10 sanctuary shekels, solid gold was what the spoons were. Malaya ketoret, and here's why. Again, Rashi quotes this: Lo matzinu ketoret liyachid v'lo al mizbach achitzon elazu bilvad. We never find an individual is allowed to bring an offering of ketoret or ketoret that is brought on the outer altar rather than on the inner altar. All of these korbanot were brought on the outer altar. And normally ketoret is the one thing we bring on the inner altar. So that's why it required Hashem to say, yes, it's okay to accept it. This was a specific teaching specifically for the Chanukat HaMizbech. That's why Moshe needs Hashem's express permission to allow it. Sirizim echad lechatat is Rashi says, why did he bring a sirizim as a chatat? Lechaper al kevrat tol metumat safek, as an offering to achieve atonement for an unknown tumah, people who were tummy and didn't realize it, and they did something, and they either ate kodesh or were going to go into the sanctuary. And they weren't known. Hikriv Nesanel ben Tzuar. Now, when it comes to the second day, the word Hikriv appears twice. It says Hikriv Bayom Hashini Hikriv Nesanel ben Tzuar, and then it says Hikriv at Karbano. Ma Talmud Lomer Hikriv b'Shifto Shel Yisachar. Why do we have this extra word of Hikriv by Yisachar? Mashlo Nemar b'Chol Hashvatim, which is not repeated in any of the others, but all the others is Bayom Hashini Nasi Livnei so and so, and Karbano was so and so. It doesn't say Hikriv Karbano. The only one who says Hikriv at Karbano is Yisachar. Why? Because the Fishabaru Uvain v'Irer, the head of the tribe of Ruvain, said, wait a minute. How Yehuda went first? Okay, it's enough that Yehuda went in front of me. Okay, he's going to be the king, so his tribe gets first. But I should be second, Reuven says. Akrivani acharav. Amar le Moshe answered me, Piagvura nemarli, sheakrivu kesedem ason ledigleya. Moshe, Hashem told me, Hashem said, no, the order is, we go in the order that we're going to be traveling. And that means Yehuda, then Yisachar, and then Zvulun, and then you'll get your chance, Reuven. L'kach Amar Hikrivet Karban. That's why it says Hikriv. He brought close his Karban. Uchasa Yurchu Mashma Hakrev, which is also can be read as Hakrev. He was told, come close. But Shalashon Tzivuy, command. Shemipia Gvur needs Tave Hakrev. Because Hashem commanded, no, it's your turn. You have to come close and bring your offering. Umau Hikriv Shnei Pamim. Why? Twice? There were two reasons that Yisachar is given the privilege of being the second one of the Shvatim to go. Achat Yodi B'Torah. First is that Yisachar were those that studied Torah. They were the ones who studied not just Torah, but they studied specifically the times to know how to construct the calendar. The achat shehem natnu eitzal nisim litav korban halalu. And the second reason why Yisachar goes twice is because Yisachar's Nasi is the one who gave the advice to all of the tribal heads that we should all bring the same offering. Whatever one brings, we should all bring the same thing, and we should not turn this into a let's try to outdo everybody else show-off program. Let's do this because we're doing this for Hashem. We should all show that we want to do the same thing. We want to be united in doing this. Soto Rabbi Yosha Darshan Amatzati Amar Pinchas Ben Yair, and Rashi quotes his source here in the book of Rabbi Yosha Darshan. He found the following: Amar Pinchas Ben Yair. Pinchas Ben Yair says, Netanel ben Suar Hisian Eitzazu. The one who gave them the advice to bring the same exact korban was Netanel ben Suar, and that's why he merits to go second. Arat Kesef. Now Rashi is going to now go into some of the symbolism of some of the items that are brought. Okay, Arat Kesef. Minyan Otio Tav B'Gematria Taf Kuf Lamed. If you add up the letters of Karat Kesef, you get to 930. Keneged Shnotav Shel Adam HaRishon. That's how long Adam HaRishon lived. So this is almost this plate. This silver plate is symbolic of Adam HaRishon. Very nice. Shloshim Umei Mishkala, and it weighed 130 shekels. Why Al Shem? Why? What does Adam have to do with 130? Because Shavim told out the Kiyum Ha'olam, when Adam had his son who was going to establish the world, i.e. Shet, from whom Noach is descended, from whom Avram is descended, from Am Yisrael is descended, Ben Meo Shloshim Shana, he was 130 years old. So that's where we get the 130 from. Now, Mizrak Echad Kesef, if you have to take the letters of Mizrak Echad Kesef and you figure out the gematria, you get Taf Kuf Chaf, you get 520. Al Shem Noach, this is to commemorate Noach, which again, now this is going to be a little, just bear with Rashi here, because this is going to be not as straightforward. Adam was pretty straightforward. It's 930, he was 930 when he died, 130 when he had kids. This one's a little bit of a twist. Okay, it's 520, but you got to split the 500 and the 20. Ki al Shem Noach Shemi Toldot ben Tav Kuf Shana. The 500 corresponds to Noach's age when he first had his kids. It was 500. Now, why the 20? Al Shem Esrim Shana Shenikzura Gezeret Hamabu called him Todosa. And the 20 years is the 20 years before he had children that Hashem already told him that he's bringing a flood. As we see, because it says in Bereshit, Kamosh Parashti, and Rashi explains, that Hashem told Noach, humanity has another 120 years to do tshuva. If they don't do tshuva in 120 years and change their whole direction, I'm bringing this flood. So that's what the 520 of Mizrak Echad Kesef symbolized. It symbolized Noach. And Rashi, quote, proves that it symbolizes something because it says, Mizrak Echad Kesef. That's why it says one mizrak of silver. Everything else it says what the item was, what it was made of, and how many there were. Here it says one bowl or one pan of silver. It doesn't say a silver pan. One. Like it says with the plate. Lomar to tell you that you have to count the value of the 13 that's in Echad to get to the number that the gematria is symbolizing. Now, this Mizrak weighed Shivim shekels, 70 shekels. Now remember, it's something that's got to allude to Noach with 70. What's the allusion to Noach of 70? Can I get Shivim umot sheyatzu mi banav? The proverbial 70 nations that Noach that come from Noach. Kaf achad, one spoon. This is connected. HaTorah shnina miyado shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And why? Because it weighs 10. What is 10? Connected Aseret HaDibrot. Symbolizes the Aseret HaDibrot. Malaya Ketoret. Now it's filled with Ketoret. Now Ketoret, interestingly enough, if you look at it, it's 709 is the gematria. However, Rashi says the gematria of Ketoret is really 613, connected to 613 mitzvot. How do you get that? Wait a minute. When you do gematria, you can switch letters every so often. So you can switch the first letter of the alphabet with the last letter, et cetera, et cetera. And if you get to the fourth letter from the end, and you switch it with the fourth letter from the beginning, so that kuf at the beginning of Ketoret becomes a dalid, now you have 613 instead of 709. So Rashi says the Ketoret is, again, because the spoon has to have something to do with Torah, because it symbolizes the Torah. The Asar Zav, obviously Asar Dibro. So the Ketoret has to come out to 613 mitzvah. Okay, now it goes into the carbonot. What's the symbolism of the carbonot? Parachad, one par keneged Avram. Why is par symbolize Avraham? Shenemar bo vayikach ben bakar. He went when he's feeding the three visitors. He takes an ox or a young calf or whatever. That's why it's a cow of the cow family. Ayil echad, the ram symbolizes Yitzchak because at the Akedah, what did Avram do? He brought an ayil instead of Yitzchak. Keves, the sheep, symbolizes Yaakov, because Yaakov was a shepherd, and he freed Yaakov. When he was working for Lavan, he had to separate Lavan's sheep from his own sheep. So that's why the Keves alludes to Yaakov. Seirizim, the goat. What is that? L'chaper al machirat Yosef. This comes to symbolize that we need a kapara, we need an atonement for having sold Yosef. When it came to selling Yosef, and they tried to convince Yaakov that they found this bloody coat, whose blood did they take? They took a serizim, they took a goat, slaughtered it, and sprinkled the blood on the coat. Okay, now that was all the Olah. Those were all the Olah offerings, were those Par, Ayil, and Keves, and the serizim was a Chatat. And now we get to the Zevach Shlamim. There were two oxen. Keneged Moshe v'Aaron, shenatnu, and their brought as a zevach shlamim, a peace offering, shenatnu shalom bein Yisrael avim shebashamayim, because they established peace between Am Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Elim, atudim, and kvasim, the three different types of sheep, the older sheep, the middle-aged sheep, the young sheep. Shlosh minim keneged kohanim levim Yisrael. There were three that are again symbolize the Kohanim, Levim, and Yisraelim, or Keneged Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, the three portions of the Tanakh. Shalosh Chamishiot. Each of them, there were five of each of these three groups. Keneged Chamisha Chumashim. That symbolizes the five books of the Torah. And the Chamesh Dibrot Aksum Maluach Echad, the Chamesh Aksum Maluach Hasheni. And the five Dibrot that are on one, and five Dibrot on the other. So the three of them together, that's why we have five, three times. Once for the Chamish Rumshei Torah, and twice for the two halves of the Luchot, of the Aseret HaDibrot. Okay. All right. Now, Bayom HaShlishi, Nasi Livnei Zvulun, Eliyav ben Chelon. Bayom HaShlishi, the Rashi says the Nasi was Livnei Zvulun, V'chein Kulam, Aval ben Netanel, Shenero Hikriv Netanel, Dofil Acharav Lomar, Nasi Yisachar. It says Nasi Yisachar after his name, whereas in all the others it says Nasi for the tribe before. Because he mentioned his name first. It was Shalonem Rabben Hikriv, no fail Alehem Lashon Zeh Nasi Livnei Poloni. In other words, he's commenting on the fact that when it came to Nasi of Yisachar, it doesn't say Nasi B'nei Yisachar, where all the others said Nasi B'nei Zvulun, Nasi Livnei Yeruvain, etc. Okay, she's just commenting on that. Now we've finished all of them, and now he goes to the Yom HaMashach. So, Bo Bayom Shenimshach Hikriv. On the same day, in other words, the first offerings were brought on the same day that the Mishkan was inaugurated and anointed. Umani Mikayim Acharei Mashach, but later on it says Acharei Zot Chanukah HaMizbeach Acharei Mashach. So this was the Chanukah HaMizbeach after it was already anointed. Even though it was brought on the same day as the Mizbeach was anointed, all of these offerings were brought after the Mishkan, after the Mizbeach had already been anointed. Another thing we learn is the fact that the Mashiach had to happen during the day, not at night, which teaches us that it had to be the Mishkan had to be inaugurated during the day. And again, so there's another pasuk. Our pasuk here comes to tell us comes to tell us that the first set of karbanot of Nachshon were brought on the same day. It wasn't that he brought them on the second day. He brought them on the first day, and it was the same day that the Mizbeach was anointed. Okay. Karat Kesef Shtemisrei. At the end of the 12-day period, they still found all 12 items were still there. The reason that at the end it gives the listing of everything to tell us that miraculously in all of these items, that all of the Nisim brought, nothing became pasul, nothing became tameh, nothing became unusable, that everything was still intact at the end of the 12-day period when they all of the everything was collected and counted out. Okay. And now Rashi is just adding more that it tells you exactly what the different shkalim are. And we'll all right. Let's go. Let's go to Sfarno for a few minutes. Okay. And he's back with Kol Kelav. So it's interesting because Sfarno wants us to understand that the Mishkan, we talk about the Mishkan and then we talk about the Mizbeach as though they're two separate entities. And Rashi and Sfarno wants to just simply that everything had its place. And the Mizbeach is specifically listed because it was outside, whereas everything else was inside. The Mizbeach is the only thing that's outside, and therefore he had to establish the Mizbeach after he set the Mishkan. The Mishkan is everything and includes everything that's in it, the menorah, the shulchan, the aron, all that is inside the Mishkan. The Mizbeach is outside, so he has to specifically mention the Mizbeach, and then he sets up the courtyard. I am going to skip now because I really want to get into, I'm going to go down a little bit to, wait a minute, okay, let's go to Chizkuni. I want to just focus on, it's interesting because there are so many different interpretations of the word Sav with these wagons. I thought it was very interesting to look at the different combinations of what people say about the wagon. So we'll start with, I think this is Chizkuni. He says that Sav comes from Lashon Sava, Lashon of army, or everything that is needed for the army, and it's, hold on. Lashon Sabah, Lashon of an army, and it says, and that's what Yonatan says, Kol Mishrei Shariaton v'Chelehon, its entire army. V'mitevot Chasarot Aleph Dugma Machatoli, and it lost its Aleph even though it should have had an Aleph. And he brings lots of examples like that. So I just thought it was interesting. So why are they called Agalot Sav? Heim Hagalot Ha'olchot B'tzvah L'Melechet HaMishkan. They were in the army of doing, in other words, they are drafted. These wagons are drafted, or they're part of the army job to do the army that is involved in moving the Mishkan. Okay, let's go to the next one, which is Dadzikanim, I think, has they have nothing on WhatsApp. Who is the next one? Here we go. Orshor has a very interesting comment on Tzav. Tzav, what does he say Tzav means? Lefi Pshat, according to the simple explanation of the word Tzav, again, Rashi said Tzav meant covered wagons. Chizkuni says it means they were associated with an army. Orshor says no. Tzav here means turtle. We know that a Tzav in Hebrew is a turtle. Why are these wagons called Tzav? Agalot, Gidolot, Kivedot. Large, heavy wagons that go very slowly because of their heavy weight. Like the turtle, hashoretz she'ein dar kol arutz, which doesn't travel very quickly. So I thought that was also an interesting thing that he says that tzavim are heavy laden wagons. And interestingly enough, I don't know whether it was Bechor Shor, but one of the Parshanim says that when they brought the wagons, they brought the entire, each wagon was carrying all of the carbonot for that pair of thing. All of those carbonot that we read that were brought each day, they all brought them in the wagons. And he says that's why they were called Savim, because they were fully laden, they were heavy, because they had all of these animals and the spoons and the whatever else they brought were all in the wagons that they brought. And that's why they were called tzav, because they're heavy. Okay. As my time is almost up, I'm going to just wanted to one quick item, because Alan asked at the beginning about the whole concept of how the different Nisim, how do we know who the Nisim were if they hadn't done the counting yet? I wanted to quote the Netziv, if I can find him on my sheet here. Here we go. Hamek Davar. Okay. Hamek Davar asks the same question Alan asked at the beginning. Hainu bi'echad lachodesh harishon. Here, the day that Moshe finishes building the Mishkan is the first day of Nisan. The Imkain, and if so, who pellet seems very strange, but how do they know us? At that point, how did they know who were going to be standing with Moshe when he did the counting in a month from then, and who were the leaders? Because the entire count didn't happen until a month later. Obviously, he says, you know what? That's not a valid question, because we know that there were Nesiim, because even when they came to give, we already said that the Nesiim were the ones who brought the stones for the ephod and the choshen. But Tzarich Lomar, and therefore we have to say that Nesiim hayu b'haskamat kol shevet shu agadol b'hem. Each tribe knew who its Nasi was. They had agreed, and they, by the consensus of the tribe, every tribe knew who was their greatest individual and was appointed Nasi. HaKadosh Baruch Hu hiskim b'shar haminyan asher hema yiyu amdim al hapkudim. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu agreed with Am Yisrael that these individuals were worthy of being the ones who should be in charge of the pikudim, of charge of the counting. So I just wanted to bring that, because that was a question that I had. How did they know if it's if it's a month early? How did they know? So I think the whole reason I wanted to bring this whole parsha up is because, again, it's a long parsha, and we always ask, why does the Torah have to repeat everything 12 times? And the answer is very, very simply. All the parshanim say this very simply, to show us that the 12 leaders of the tribe, and each one representing their tribe, did this in a way that there was no competition. They did this to show that they were all on the same page, that Am Yisrael was united, and that we should not be each trying to outdo the other by showing how great we are, or how whatever. We should be working together to build harmony within the Mishkan, within all of Am Yisrael. And I think that's a very powerful lesson from this parsha. And even though it's a long parsha and it takes a long time to read, it's worth it for that very, very important lesson. And I hope we should take that lesson to heart, and our leadership should take that lesson to heart, that leaders have to be able to work together, have to be able to compromise, they have to be able to work for the good of the people they are representing instead of only for their own good. And when they do that, then we will be able to have successful leadership and successful outcomes from that leadership. Thank you all. I open it up for questions, comments, or feedback at this time. Anybody? Any comments or questions? Is anybody still awake? Okay, have a good rest of the week, everyone.
Thank you.
Hope you it was worthwhile, and apologize for the technical difficulties. Hopefully by next week we'll have them ironed out.